Hello, welcome to Wings Talks. I'm your host, Frank, and we'll be talking with different folks from the community about important issues that we need to talk about.
Hi, my name is Max, and I use they, them, and he, him pronouns.
Right. So today we're talking about gendered spaces in both the gay, queer, and fetish scene, and why is this an important topic for you?
I mean, gendered spaces is like a delicate and important topic at the same time, because for me as a trans person, like I've been told that I cannot attend certain parties because people think that I don't belong there, which is a big problem. But on the other hand, I've also experienced through my transition access to certain spaces that were closed off for me before. So it's kind of like a really, really interesting thing where I have a lot of, I would say like different perspectives and different insights than most other people do. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it with you.
What are some of the things you've heard people saying when denying access when you were being denied?
I mean, mostly it's about anatomy, that people were like, okay, so because you're not a real man, so whatever that is, people said like, okay, you cannot attend certain parties, like specifically sex parties that were like, okay, no, I think we think you don't fit in there. And I'm like, why is that? What is your problem? You know, it's like, I know not everyone is into everything. Not everyone is into every type of anatomy, regardless if the person is trans or not. And that's fine. You know, it's like not everyone needs to have the same shared desires. And for me, you know, I also don't want to have everyone next to me in bed. You know, that's just the thing. And if people say like, okay, this is not my cup of tea, perfectly fine. But like excluding me from a space just because of a certain physical appearance that I have, you know, it's like taking a decision for an entire group. That's a big problem.
And so you've been to these spaces before. What kind of spaces have you been to in this case?
I don't know if you would count gay bars as like gendered spaces, but like, you know, given the audience that predominantly goes to these places, it's like, it was a new experience for me to walk into a gay men's bar for the first time. And, you know, like I've done that before I started my transition, and, you know, like being seen or recognized as someone who is not male or masculine, you know, no one turns around and is like, who is that? And that has changed for me, you know, now that I walk into these spaces, like it's a completely different response from what I was getting before. And also at the same time, I've started to go to sex parties, to gay men's sex parties. I've been like, I love to go to the sauna and fetish parties and everything, but also like there is a festival in Berlin called the Stretch Festival. It has nothing to do with stretching anyone or any body parts, you know, although it happens around Easter where there's all the fetish stuff going on in Berlin. That's like a different thing. And it's a festival specifically for men and masculinities. And when I heard about it the first time, I was like, why the hell do we need another space for men? You know, like that was my initial response. And then my partner was like, because he's been going to this festival before, and he was like, no, please go and check it out and take a look before you judge. And I actually did. And it was an amazing experience for me in a way that I saw like a group full of men or masculine identifying people. And there was so much vulnerability, sensitivity, emotions, and everything filled in that space that I've never seen anywhere else before among men. You know, it's like in a way that I felt like because it was a specific space just for men, people in this space didn't have to make this clear distinction of like, okay, I'm a man, I'm not a woman, so I need to act in every certain way so people don't see me as a woman. So in that space, because there were no women in that space, no one had to do this dance or performance about like, you know, and that was something like to see this type of vulnerability that created this space was an amazing experience for me to see, okay, there is a necessity or it is important to have certain spaces for certain people. And that should be based, you know, on identity, not on physical appearances. And it's also that space. It is open to anyone who identifies as male or on the male spectrum, regardless how their body looks like, and this is something, you know, that it's also fully accepted in that space, and that was a new way for me to discover also like male spaces in a very sensitive and open way.
Very cool. And yeah, we don't have enough spaces where we are allowed to be vulnerable as men, especially in the gay scene. I mean, there's a whole part of the gay community and gay scenes where it's this really tough kind of form of masculinity that we expect to be portraying and participate in. That's this traditional, whatever, hetero seeming type of masculinity. And, you know, in many ways it's problematic, of course, because it doesn't allow for any vulnerability, of course. And it's not very open to many people either. So yeah, classic. That sounds like an amazing festival. So that's really cool. Nice.
I mean, like gay spaces, or also like the response that I sometimes get from entering these spaces, it's like there is still, I would say, like some sort of like a narrow-minded view on these spaces, because like no matter if it's Grindr, which is also like a gay space, it's a gay online space, but it's like a gay space, or if it's a party that tells me you can't be there, you can't go there, or if someone reacts weird to me in the sauna because they're not, you know, they don't expect seeing a diverse body walking through that space, and also people telling me on Grindr and Scruff, like, why are you on here? Like, why aren't you just a heterosexual woman? And I'm like, sorry, but like life is not only about sex, you know, there's much more to it. Why my identity as a masculine person matters to me, except of just hooking up with guys, you know, and for me, this idea, like, or like, I feel that there needs to be there's a big need for more education about like what gay spaces actually are. Like, you know, it's like, it's a political space also, which often people forget, you know, it's like, it's not always been for granted, or we didn't have these spaces, or our community didn't have these spaces for a very long time, and we fought really hard to have such spaces where we can express ourselves and our identities and kiss and fuck and whatever, do with whatever we want with people in these spaces, or just hang out, you know, and socialize. And this is something that I find that many people actually forget, that keeping these spaces alive is very important. And also, on the other hand, what also people, or many cis gay men in these spaces don't know, is that trans people have actually fought on the forefront to making these spaces, to creating these spaces, you know, like the Stonewall riots, just as an example. Like, there were trans people in the forefront, in the front lines, getting beaten up by cops, but like the people who were invited on stage later to speak on stage were only white cis gay men, you know. And this is something, you know, like fighting for these spaces, we're good enough, but then actually using these spaces, still today people try and tell us, oh no, this is not for you. So this is something, you know, where I feel like we need much more education, and also like every now and then a little reminder that those spaces are also political spaces. They're there to enjoy ourselves, but it's still something that we need to fight for, keeping them alive.
Are there any benefits that a club or a party may have to having, well, let's talk about both sides. Are there any benefits to having a male-only gendered space? And then opposite to that, what are the benefits of having a more open space?
I mean, male-only spaces, again, like if it's based on an identity matter, that someone says, I identify as male, so this grants me access to that space, I'm all in. You know, it's like, it's something, as I said before, it's kind of like, for me, it's important to also, like, for people, if they want to experience a certain type of sexuality, for example, if they know, okay, like for me, for myself, I also identify as androsexual. That means like I'm attracted to masculinity, you know, and this is something, if it's a sex party, why not having a space for like-minded people who are also attracted to masculinities, you know? It always depends on, like, from what perspective like a gendered space is coming from. If it's coming from, I want to exclude certain people, like with the focus on exclusion, or with the focus on creating a safe space for a specific group, you know, this is like it's a two it's two sides of what of course gendered spaces can have. it's often a lot of, you know, uneducated questions that are coming, and that are generally fine if people ask questions. But like if I'm on Grindr, you know, I'm a trans activist, I answer questions all the time. I have like my social media is basically just based on education around gender diversity. But if I'm on Grindr and looking for a hookup, I don't necessarily want to get into these conversations of like, oh yeah, sure, I'll tell you my whole transition story in, you know, to a complete stranger on the internet. You know, it's like, and you know, it happened to me before that I was in gay spaces, for example, at the sauna, and you see each other, you're flirting, and you know, you're interested in one another, and then, you know, I make it clear very quickly that, you know, listen, I'm a bit different, and things might be new to you, or maybe not. Just saying, and you know, the reactions that I get from people are mostly okay. Like I had it a couple of times that they were absolutely not okay, but you know, this is something I have to deal with. But yeah, for me, like generally I'm fine, you know, like the way, if I walk into a gay bar, people usually don't recognize or see me as a trans person, unless they know me from social media or wherever. But it's at that point it's still fairly safe for me, the way that I pass. That means like the way that I blend in as a masculine person, and also like people consider me, I would say, like oftentimes as attractive, so people are flirting with me, looking at me, and if I then come out as trans later on, it's often a surprise for them, you know. And it's kind of like this dismantling the idea of that also trans people always have to be visible as such. It's like just this stereotypical image of like, yeah, of course I can see who's trans. I get that a lot, you know.
Our perspectives of gender are like in boxes. Even if we think about trans folks, for many people, it's in a box of what that means to them as well. So
it always depends on if I feel safe, you know. That's another question, you know. Like I only come out as trans if I feel it's a safe space for me, because there's also moments when I'm like, oh, maybe not right now, you know. I don't need to push it. I don't need to, you know, I've experienced enough bullshit and not enough, you know, violent experiences in those situations. And I don't mean not only physical, but like if people just tell me like, what the fuck, like what's wrong with you, you know, like this is also type of like psychological violence. If people tell me the way I am is wrong, and this is something that I also sometimes need to feel whether or not if it's okay, but most of the times, and I feel it's getting more and more okay in general. So if you frame it in a positive way, it's the same if I tell someone on Grindr, sorry, I don't like you, or if I tell someone, sorry, I'm looking for something else. You know, it's like a difference of like, I don't want you there, or I want something very specific. And it's, I think, the approach how we go into the discussion of gendered spaces. And I think that there is a need for you know, marginalized communities, or also marginalized sexualities. Like men in it, like as a whole in our society, are not a marginalized group, but gay men or gay sexuality is, and we need safe spaces also for experiencing that type of stuff, you know. And I think again, it's the approach of how you want to create that space. If you do it by excluding someone, or if you want to create something for a very specific group, is a completely different story. I've spent some time in the Bay Area and went out a lot, like in San Francisco and in the Castro, you know. It's like just there was like the way, like for me also, like trying, like the first feeling of actually identifying with the gay community was in the States, because it feels much more progressed over there, in a way that like the acceptance of transmasculine people, there's not even a question that we could not go to any of these parties, you know. Like if someone would say that party would be shut down. And in Germany, we're not there yet. We're still, you know, it still takes some time.
Yeah, you made a good point. I find I'm from Canada, and same thing. I think it might even be not illegal, but you're not allowed to have a party where you decide who enters based on their genitalia. Like, it's just not allowed. But here in Europe, I can't speak for all of Europe. I can speak for the Netherlands. You're speaking for Germany. It is still a thing. It's still a big issue. And this is why we're having this conversation, I think. What solution would you offer to folks who are running businesses that host men-only spaces, either sex parties, clubs, or bars?
Mm-hmm. What I definitely would recommend is, if you want to be open, if you want to be inviting to the whole spectrum of masculinity, including also trans-masculine people, then speak with the community, speak with people like me, and approach them and be just like, hey, what can we do to make that space comfortable for you as well? And what I really like, for example, there is a sauna in Berlin where I used to go to when I was still living in Berlin, and every now and then when I visit, I go back there. What I did, like, I contacted them before I went for the first time. I sent them an email and was like, hey, listen, actually, like, our trans-masculine people without bottom surgery welcome at your space. And they sent me an email, like a really lovely email back, and was like, of course you are. We even we even trained our staff specifically around trans people. So if you have any issue, if something happens, if someone is like, getting at you in the wrong way, just come to the bar and someone will help you. And that was, for me, wow, this was really amazing. And I had that one experience, like, it was like, I think the first or second time that I was at the sauna, that I also don't like if people don't put a towel everywhere, but like, I didn't have another chance. I only had one towel, and it was packed in the sauna, and I didn't want to unwrap it entirely from my waist. I just sat there and had my feet on the bench below me, and someone was just yelling at me like, "Rah! No feet on the wood." And I'm just like, "Woo, girl, what's wrong with you? You don't need to yell. You can just tell it to me in a really nice way." And I just pretended to, like, I don't understand, and da. And then he was just like, yeah, he's probably just like has a really small dick and doesn't want to show it. And I'm like, oh, if it's always about that. Anyways, the person who was doing, there was like this infusion thing, like a whole shebang, and like the person who did the infusion noticed the situation and read it in the perfect way and just gave me a second towel and was just like, here, if you want to put it underneath your feet, and just gave the other person a really, really nasty look. And he recognized the situation. I don't know if he saw my scars on my chest or whatever it was, but it was, I felt like, okay, someone dealt with it. I didn't have to deal with it. And it was good. And this is what I recommend if people run parties or events or whatever. Just make sure that you're aware of what could occur in certain situations by talking to trans community, and also, make it visible. Like, the only thing that with the sauna, it's missing on their website. I would love them to put that on their website, to be like, hey, listen, we're a trans inclusive space. That would be amazing, to have it also like send it out into the community, that people see it immediately when they go on their website of the event or the space or whatever it is. That would be ideal and great.
I think that's great. I think that's some great advice. I think it is more important for folks to broaden their sense of what is a man, that they're allowing men based on what characteristics that they're allowing into this event or party and space. But also, I think it's great to announce or make public or make visible that trans folks are included or welcomed, so that everyone going will know that, first of all. So for the cis folks as well to know, exactly. So that if they are completely bigoted or whatever, prejudice, whatever word you want to use, then they can fuck off and not go. And otherwise, other trans folks will be feeling a little more welcome to go as well. So I think that's really good advice. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see, like and subscribe. And if you want to join in the conversation, you can message us on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. You can find the links below. Talk to you next time.